of Jesus asking her to spring him from the slammer. And I think the interesting problem is we have the same sort of situation today, don't we? Jesus just won't fit into a box. He doesn't do what we want him to do. Jesus that day, the day of our story where he calls Matthew, had already had a very busy day. This is one day in the guy's life. He puts certainly me to shame. He's been across from Capernaum. He's healed a centurion's servant remotely. He's healed a man with leprosy. He's calmed the wind and the waves of a furious storm on the Sea of Galilee. He comes back to Capernaum. He's healed Peter's mother-in-law of a fever. Remember that. He schools a rabbi. In Matthew, there's two men who are possessed by demons that we call legion. And he drives all the demons out of these men, and they go down the hill into the lake in a herd of pigs. He comes back across. He heals another man of leprosy. This is all in one day, mind you. And he gets back to Capernaum, and it's evening. And you would think, go home. Go home. Have a cold one. Nuke a TV dinner. Turn on Jeopardy. Something. But take a rest. But instead, what does Jesus do? No, it's the end of the day, and he has to go and call another disciple. Only this time, it's a real doozy. This time, it's a guy named Matthew, who is a tax collector. Now, if you are the Messiah, which is God's anointed, you do not call a tax collector, collaborator with Rome, to be one of your disciples. It's bad, bad optics. Jesus doesn't seem to care, though, does he? And then as we progress through the story, what happens? It says in our passage here, later on, Jesus goes over to Matthew's house and has dinner. But if you read it in the Greek, what it really says is, Jesus is found reclining in this tax collector's house and reclining at the table with sinners and tax collectors. So reclining at the table, the image, imagine you're one of the Jews, and this guy is here to save us, right? This guy is the Messiah. He's here to save us. And you look into this tax collector's house, and the Messiah is laying on a bed of cushions around a giant big vat in the center of lamb stew. And the smell of lamb stew is coming out of the house. And as the breeze blows the curtains a little bit, you look in and you get a glimpse of Jesus lying down with fresh baked bread. And he's dunking it into lamb stew and having a conversation with a prostitute on one side and a tax collector on the other. It's enough to confuse anybody, isn't it? I think I would be like, wait a minute. What are you up to? The Messiah is supposed to come back as the line of David, which means he's going to be a king, and he's also supposed to be a high priest. High priests don't eat with tax collectors and sinners. And sinners are defined in the Greek as depraved, lustful, sinful, thieves, debaucherous. And so the situation kind of comes to a head, doesn't it? So the Pharisees ask the disciples as they look in and everyone smells the bread and the lamb, why does your master eat with sinners? If I was one of Jesus' disciples, I think I might be like, well. And thankfully, Jesus hears the question. Why they're so PO'd is, this isn't the movie script, right? Jesus comes back. He annihilates Rome. Anybody that collaborated with the Romans, like the tax collectors who stole the money that paid for the stew, are judged and annihilated. And the elect, the people who have kept the rules and the law for thousands of years, are held up on a pedestal and vindicated. And Jesus, in typical rabbinical fashion, doesn't answer the question. What he says instead is, you guys just don't get it. I've come to call the sick, not the righteous, or those who think that they're righteous. So go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and compassion. What does he say? I desire mercy and compassion, not sacrifice. As far as I can tell, Jesus says, follow me a whole lot, right? I cannot think of one instance where Jesus says, worship me. There's two instances in the Bible where the disciples do worship Jesus, and we do worship Jesus today. But he never says, I came to start a new religion, I came for you to worship me. He never says, is everyone here? Okay, we got the head count, everyone is here, okay, worship me, please. He never does that. But what he does say is, follow me. And when you follow him, it can put you in some pretty interesting places, right? Like at a table full of hookers and tax collectors. So the Pharisees are speaking this language of sacrifice, and Jesus basically says, you're speaking the wrong language. It's the same thing for us today. Why is this sermon really even relevant today? It's 2,000 years later. And we shouldn't judge the Pharisees too harshly either. But the Pharisees are kind of like the elder brother in the prodigal son parable. I have slaved for you for forever. I am the good people. We are the righteous people. And this is how you treat us? You're in there reclining at the table with all of these people? Jesus says, go learn this lesson. When you're in the mode of sacrifice, it's impossible to love God. When you're in the mode of sacrifice, you can't love your neighbor. When you're in the mode of sacrifice, you can't love yourself. Because we're spending too much time judging other people. I do it. I have a terrible time with it. We all struggle with it. I don't know about you, but have you ever noticed that every person who drives like a jackass, can I say, has tinted windows? Now, if you have tinted windows, don't go, hey, I have tinted windows because I have an eye condition that makes me need tinted. And Charlie, you're really, no, I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive. I'm just saying, do you ever, when you're driving, I do this, not as much as I used to, but you know that car that and they're tailgating, and the sound inside is boom, 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 boom. And they're speeding and they're stopping and slowing down and all that kind of stuff. And then the window cracks and a bunch of smoke blows out the window. I want to see what they look like. I want to see, you've done it, right? Anybody done that? Anybody said, the person that's driving that car, I just want to know what they look like. Nobody. I see a lot of smiles. I know it's baloney, you do it too. But you notice when you drive up, they all have tinted windows, so you can't look in and see what they look like. It's like they do it on purpose. I think they do it on purpose. They realize they have a problem, and so they say, I'm going to drive like a jackass my whole life. And so I better get tinted windows. Or else people are going to recognize me. I'm sitting at Stewart's having a steak salad, and people are going to recognize me as that driver. It's this judgmental mentality. We all suffer from it to one degree or another. But as long as we're mired in that like the Pharisees, we're not going to be able to truly empathize and have compassion for other people. That person that's driving like a creep probably has a reason why they're driving like a creep. But Marta and I have been watching, has anybody watched that show? It's a Netflix series called it's called Ottoman, I think. about the Ottoman Empire. It's about Mehmed II, the Sultan, who conquered Constantinople. And his half-brother, or his brother Vlad Dracula, he ends up going to war with. And I was thinking about this sermon as we were watching it last night. Vlad Dracula, who Count Dracula is based on, is also known as Vlad the Impaler. And so one of the things that Vlad the Impaler did was, whoever he conquered, and eventually when he had to retreat from his home territory and leave and abandon it for the Ottomans to come in and take over, rather than allow his people to become Ottoman and continue to live their life as farmers or whatever, he had them all impaled on spikes that went in through here and came out their chest. 20,000 of them. It was such a shocking sight that actually the Ottoman Sultan put out his prayer rug and cried for days because it was so incredible. Can God possibly ask us to have compassion for Vlad the Impaler? I think so. I think so. I think we are meant to have compassion for Vlad the Impaler and the amount of sickness and twistedness that that person must have. When I look at Vladimir Putin and the destruction that he is causing, I think, can we have compassion for Vladimir Putin? And I think Jesus calls us to have compassion for Vladimir Putin. That's the tough part about this. As I start to wrap up, Jesus says the hookers and the tax collectors get into heaven before the Pharisees and the scribes. And I think it's because the drunkards, hookers, thieves, tax collectors are able to look at themselves and admit their unworthiness. They're able to say, I have a problem with this, this, or the other thing. And they admit it to themselves, they can admit it to another human being. It's their ticket to the great banquet. And they take all of that to the one person who can offer them salvation. Salvation not meaning be real good and you get into heaven. Salvus, the root word, the Latin root, meaning to be healed, to be made whole. And Jesus is the one person that can sit there and not tisk and give them a list of things that they've done wrong, but take a big hunk of bread and dip it into the lamb stew, look at him with a glint in his eye and say, I understand, and I have compassion for you, and you're worth more than you will ever know. I was thinking about this. When Jesus comes back, where will we find him? Will we find him in Kirkpatrick's hall next door? Or will we find him someplace that, frankly, is utterly shocking? I think we will find him in a place that is utterly shocking, and hopefully we can look through the windows and not be surprised, but be delighted instead. Amen.